Good morning, Liberty. It is Wednesday morning, April 3rd, 2019. My name is Michael Bolden, broadcasting to you from here in my home office and studio in downtown Los Angeles for the 10th Amendment Center. I really appreciate you joining me for a little bit of your time today. And on this episode, I want to talk about the economy, deficit, debt, Republicans, Democrats. A lot of people like telling me, oh, you got to go for the Republicans because at least they're going to take us to the fiscal cliff a little slower. And I've mentioned on this show that I don't really think that's the case. I think they've often been as bad and sometimes even worse. I can actually make the case that many times, at least on the economy and big government spending, at least when there's a Democrat running the White House, the Republicans act like an opposition party. They try to throw roadblocks in the way. Now, certainly, I think it's pretty clear that some of the biggest spending programs being proposed come from Democrats and the left and the progressives, but it's very hard for them to get them passed. And when Republicans hold all the branches of government, there is no opposition because Democrats don't want to cut spending, or there's very little of it. And the only time they really want to oppose it is when Republicans are in power. So I want to talk a little bit about that and give some examples, some recent stats, some reporting that Mike Meharry has done. He's a great part of our team here at the 10th Amendment Center for close to a decade, probably 8-9 years. And he's been working with Peter Schiff, blogging for schiffgold.com for quite a while now, doing a podcast with them as well. So he's given me a lot of insight as well. So I'm going to walk through some of these reports, and hopefully you find them interesting as well. Now, before doing that, I do want to mention that this show is actually pre-recorded. We are not streaming live through Facebook, Periscope, and YouTube like we normally do. I have scheduled and uploaded this video as a premiere on both Facebook and YouTube, and then we're also streaming the pre-record through Periscope. So I do apologize for that. Mike's actually flying in from Kentucky to here in Los Angeles, and we're going to hang out for a little bit, talk a little bit shop, eat some food, have some fun, hang out with good friends. And then we're actually doing a road trip because I'm speaking on Saturday morning at the annual convention for the California Libertarian Party up in Concord, and I think that should be a fun event. I'm also going to be speaking at an event at the end of May, which is the Republican Liberty Caucus annual convention here in Southern California. I don't have the details of the location handy, but that's coming up soon too. And then later this year, there's a Mises Institute event in Los Angeles that I expect to be speaking at. But anyways, with that all of aside, getting past all that, of course, if you're listening in the archive or watching in the archive or listening in the podcast, none of that actually matters. So I appreciate you all being here. I appreciate the thumbs up. I appreciate the likes. I appreciate the reviews and all of that. Thank you so very much. Let's get into the reports here. We can cover that right now. The first one we actually just published yesterday or today as I'm recording the night before. Crunching the numbers. Trump economy equals Obama economy. We keep hearing from people that the Trump economy is booming. Everything's going great. And I think this is political garbage. And Mike starts out his report by saying, when you crunch the numbers, the Trump economy isn't any better than the Obama economy. And in some ways, it's worse. Last week, he reports the final revised GDP numbers for the fourth quarter of 2018 came out. Now, of course, we're not relying totally on GDP, but this is just one of the metrics that we keep getting told. Oh, GDP is booming. It's awesome. This is the best, the greatest economy ever. Things like that. And according to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, growth came in at 2.2%. This is growing the GDP. This was a downward revision from the initial estimate of 2.6. Okay, 2.2, 2.6, blah, blah, blah. So the 2018 economic growth with this downward quarter four revision, it ended up below President Trump's 3% target, coming in at 2.9. Pretty close. Now, this equals Obama's best year in 2015. Now, there have been several quarters with GDP growth above 3% since Trump took office, according to Mike's report. But this was also true during Obama's tenure. So how much different is it really? If they're saying 3% is the metric and Obama sometimes hit 3% and Trump is sometimes hitting 3%, then you really can't say one is awesome and the other one's garbage. or one's so much better, because on that metric, they're very similar. And Mike points out that the best quarter of growth came in quarter 2 of 2018, so last year, at 4.2%. And Obama's best quarter was in the second quarter of 2014, when it was 5.1%. Now, we have more years of data under Obama than under the just first couple of years under Trump. But again, to me, the economy isn't booming. And Mike puts it this way: when you boil it all down, economic growth under Trump has roughly mirrored growth under the best years of Obama. But there is one glaring difference: the expansion of debt. And debt is a serious, serious problem. James Madison put it this way. He said, armies and debts and taxes are the known instruments for bringing the many under the domination of the few. So let's say you just want to cheer on the GDP and you just say, oh, the debt, the deficit, all this stuff, this is all going to be resolved in time. Even if you want to kick the can down the road, you're kicking the can down the road on one of the three things that James Madison, the father of the Constitution, said is the known instrument. Not like, okay, well, let me explain to you why. Everyone understood that these three things is what created a tyrannical system. So you can't have this type of thing and a free society. So Mike goes on. He said, in fiscal 2015, Obama's best year of economic growth, the budget deficit was $439 billion, a huge number, a big number, he puts it. But the budget deficit in 2018 under Trump was even bigger, $779 billion, almost double. Mind you, this was a Republican-controlled Congress. And, and I've talked about this in the past. I've done a short video on this as well. I'll try to include it in the show notes. But basically, the point is that everybody wants to say that their guy isn't the problem. If it's their senator or their representative or their party or their president, it's always somebody else's fault. But when you're talking about budget deficits at this level and a $22 trillion national debt, and that's barely scratching the surface of the real overall numbers, at that level, no one gets let off the hook. They are all to blame, and they are all part of a serious, serious problem. And Mike goes on. He says, to put things in even more stark perspective, the Trump administration ran an all-time record deficit of $234 billion in February alone. So in 2015, Obama had an entire year of $439 billion. And in just 1 month of this year, Trump came in more than half of that. That's more than half, Mike writes, of 2015's entire year deficit. I mean, this is not a constitutionally limited government. And if you believe in the Constitution, you cannot be supportive of these people doing these things, period. You can't be on the side of the Constitution and be okay with that. Maybe you can find some reason to be like, oh, I want to turn a blind eye to it. But as I've said over and over and over, George Washington, John Adams, and so many others warned us against turning a blind eye, because you're either supportive of the people doing it, you're thinking short term, or for any reason, really. Because once you turn a blind eye and you don't reject them outright for these types of actions, then you're creating a new baseline where the next people are going to take it and make it worse. And if anyone told you back in late 2016, maybe December or so, that the Trump administration was going to run up a bigger government as far as spending than the Obama administration, you probably would have been laughed out of town by a lot of people. So this is how Mike sums it up. Basically, the economy under Trump achieved an identical GDP growth number as it did under Obama, but the federal government ran 77% higher deficits in the process. 77% higher. And that is extremely dangerous. And of course, we're not praising Obama. Obama was a piece of garbage, hated the Constitution. But if Obama was terrible, and let's say someone could argue with me and tell me, oh, Trump and the Republicans, they're less bad on this, they've cut taxes, whatever it may be. If we're arguing over something that's a little bit better or a little bit worse, let's say he's not as bad as Obama. Being not as bad as Obama or the Obama administration or the Democrats isn't something to be proud of. It's seriously bad. So going into the national debt, Mike notes that in February, it hit $22 trillion and beyond. And when Trump took office in 2017, it was just under $20 trillion. So that's over a $2 trillion increase in just 2 years. This is insane. Obama spent like crazy. But when you're talking this kind of astronomical number, let's say it's 10% different. This is not good. It's never good when it's this bad. And Mike points out that the federal government ran these deficits during a recession. Not that government spending can really ever get you out of a recession, but this is the Keynesian mentality of all these people. Big government spending, $1 trillion in infrastructure is what the Trump administration wants. Obama wanted to spend the way out of the recession. And of course, they're going to run huge deficits. That's what they do. But supposedly, and that's the point, supposedly now the government is booming. Or the economy is booming. We keep hearing that it's booming. But then if that's the case, why are the deficits? Why there have to be so much deficit spending? And Mike sums it up. He closes out by saying, I'm not an Obama apologist. I'm going to talk to him when he gets in town. And if you're watching it live, he's going to be here in about a half hour. So we got to stop making that. We're going to talk about what's right and what's wrong, whether someone thinks we're an apologist for Team A or Team B. Because, and that's a real problem. If you oppose something that the Trump administration does, a lot of people who are basically mindless on the Constitution and liberty just assume immediately that if you're not on Team Trump, you're obviously on Team Hillary or on Team Obama. And you can easily support the Constitution and oppose all of them and all of their actions. And Mike says the point is the economy is not doing any better with Trump at the helm. Republicans need to face reality and quit pretending that it is. And I just wanted to quick review this other post that he did talking about the record deficit for the month of February. Most in history. All-time record deficit of $234 billion in February alone, according to a Treasury Department report released just at the end of March. The February 19 deficit, he writes, topped the previous high of $231 billion set in February 2012 by the Obama administration. So here's an instance where they're worse. The Trump administration and the Republicans have been worse. The budget deficit for fiscal 2019, beginning October 1st, so this is when Republicans were still in office, sending them all that spending, totals $544 billion. It's even worse than it was for the same period in 2018. It keeps getting worse. So I don't want to just bore you guys with all these numbers, but the CBO has basically said that we're going to have this $1 trillion deficit by 2022. But they're very conservative about this. And it looks like that the spending is well ahead of those estimates. It's well ahead of that schedule. And that is, again, extremely, extremely dangerous. And Meharry points out that the only other time the federal government has run deficits this high was during the 4 years from 2009 to 2012. So again, you could say, Bolden, shut up about calling Trump a bad guy. Obama was worse. Well, according to the numbers on this particular metric, the only person in history that has ever been worse has been Barack Obama. And if you're the second worst to Obama, you're pretty much garbage in regards to the Constitution. The spending is so out of control. And if you take the view that I do, that you should follow the founder's advice, George Washington said, cherish the public credit. Use it sparingly and wisely. And Madison warned us about armies and debts and taxes being the tools of dominating by the few, the many by the few. And this is just going to be a short episode, but I wanted to cover this, and hopefully you find it interesting. This was a really cool blog that Mike did as well, that there's actually a new tool so you can analyze and compare how Republicans spend like Democrats. We keep hearing again over and over that Republicans aren't as bad. They may be awful, but at least they're not Democrats. Democrats are going to run you off the fiscal cliff at 70 miles an hour, and Republicans are going at the speed limit. Well, these numbers means they're going 80 or 70. Sometimes they're going the exact same speed as the Democrats, sometimes a little slower, and sometimes a little faster. And to me, that's not good enough and not even close. And in this last article that I want to cover, Mike starts out, he says, once upon a time, Republicans cared about spending and budget deficits, but no more. And I don't actually believe that. Maybe they did. And maybe it's very possible that I don't know my history in regards to that. Maybe they were, maybe the Goldwater days, maybe even during the Reagan days. I'm not sure. But in modern times, as much as I have looked at it, they've just been terrible. And Mike writes, in fact, by analyzing voting records in Congress, we find that the GOP is every bit as responsible for the out-of-control spending as the Democrats. There's a group called the Coalition to Reduce Spending. I like that. They created a website called Spending Tracker. And this is pretty cool. You just punch in your representative, your zip code, and you can either pull up your representative or your senator, and you can see how they're doing. Are they really bad? How much are they voting for? I'll do an example. I'm going to pull up mine here in a moment. I actually didn't know my imperial representative until I did this. And of course, he's awful. So over at the Heartland Institute, they use the website to broadly analyze spending in the 115th Congress. Its analysis, Mike writes, found that there wasn't a whole lot of difference between Republicans and Democrats. Members of Congress from both parties support spending inordinate amounts of money. The average amount of spending from any member of either party is $1.58 trillion of increase. And he put it this way. Overall, there's not too much difference between spending by Democrats and Republicans. And if you're really having to break it down to like, well, it's $500 billion less or $250 billion less, they're just terrible. And I don't think any of these people that do this should be deserving of your vote. Even if it's a defensive vote, this is my opinion. You guys are going to run with it and do whatever you think, but I cannot ever support anyone who is doing this kind of stuff. So, I mean, it's a lot easier in my situation because my only options are going to be bad and bad. And I think, honestly, if people drop the idea, stop holding to the idea that the Republican team is less bad than... Or maybe that the Republicans actually do some good things when they're out of power. For example, I've often talked about Ted Cruz, how he was willing to shut down the government or at least filibuster over funding Obamacare when Obama was in office. And then once Trump got in office, he voted to fund whatever, because he's being challenged by, I think he was challenged by Beto, right? Who's running for president. And so he's getting challenged from the hard left or soft left, whatever you want to call it. And then he's willing to fund this because he's worried about elections. Well, if winning means unconstitutional trash, then they're not good guys. But yes, Cruz was doing some good things, some, not all, but he was doing some good things to oppose the Obama administration and the Democrats when they were in power. So there's a case to be made there. And Mike notes, of course, there are exceptions to the rule. Bidlack, who's the guy from the Heartland Institute, said 2 current members of Congress have voted for net spending decreases through their overall time in office. Of course, surprise, surprise. Representative Justin Amash has voted to cut spending by roughly $130 billion since he took his seat in 2019. I think that number's wrong. He's been in there longer. Is it 2016? I don't know. Maybe someone knows. You can leave it in the chat and I'll see it later on when I'm looking through the archives. But his number since he's been in office is $130 billion voting to cut. Representative Thomas Massey is the other. Voted for about $56 billion in spending decreases since going to D.C. in 2012. So these are the only 2 that over their entire time in office have voted. If you add it all up, they've voted to decrease spending. Now, in recent years, there are some other Republicans that are voting for actual net spending decreases. In the last 2-year congressional session, not just Amash and Massey, but Jimmy Duncan in Tennessee, Paul Labrador in Idaho, Morgan Griffith in Virginia, Senator Rand Paul in Kentucky, and Senator Mike Lee. They all voted for overall cuts. That's over the last 2 years. I'm interested to see the numbers. Maybe I should pull it up for Rand Paul over his entire time. He's supposed to be the libertarian standard bearer, and he should certainly be tabulated as voting for a net decrease over his entire time in office, but maybe that's not the case. Here's what Bidlack says, and this is an interesting quote. Our generation is increasingly burdened with unsustainable spending and debt. And now they're just thinking about the economic crisis. I recognize, like James Madison did, that massive spending and debts leads to a situation where government comes in and takes more power for itself. It creates a scenario where you have a crisis eventually, and then out of a crisis, most of the time, you have rule with an iron fist. And that is the last thing that we need, is to make things even worse. So unsustainable spending and debt, he says, while the vast majority of politicians claim to be doing the right thing. I mean, everybody says, oh yeah, I'm helping my people. I believe in the Constitution. Republican people will say things like that. But they're really not, except in very rare cases. Transparency into actual voting records is the missing piece. So let's look at this website. I think it's a pretty interesting tool. I'd be interested to see how things are when you look at it, but I'm just going to punch in my zip code here for my imperial representative at spendingtracker.org. My guy is Jimmy Gomez. And now, when you first pull it up, and I played around with this a little bit, wondering why Jimmy Gomez, a Democrat from downtown central Los Angeles in California, is rated overall very low as far as the amount of spending increases. If you're watching the video, you can obviously see this. So you get an overall rating. They're very low. Then you have versus party. It's anywhere from very low to very high. And then versus the state, the rest of the state. And he's coming up as very low in all of it. But the trick here is that there's a selection, an option lower down where you can either choose, again, this is over at spendingtracker.org, and I've got all the links in the show notes, which is over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. So you either have votes on bills that were actually enacted or votes on everything. And of course, it makes more sense to choose all bills because it shows how they voted on stuff, all the spending that they voted to increase. Even if it didn't get passed, it shows their mentality. So if I just choose stuff that was passed, Gomez looks like, he's thrifty. The guy isn't spending a lot, over 10 years. If I change it to 1 year, he's a top saver. But as soon as you flip it to all bills, his overall spending is really high. For 1 year, 3 years. I'm changing it to 5 and then 10. So you got 1, 3, 5, and 10. So basically, Jimmy Gomez and what he wants to do, even if it doesn't get passed, what his record shows is that he wants to spend a lot. He wants to spend a lot even in comparison to the Democratic Party as a whole. And he wants to spend a lot even in comparison to the rest of the state of California. So this guy's one of the worst of the worst. It doesn't make sense to me why you would only want to see how they voted on stuff that was passed, because it doesn't really tell you their true intentions. So let me pull this back here and then maybe refresh it. I guess I got to go through a bunch of them. And I want to look at my senators here. So if you click it and change it to senators, again, 90012 is the zip. And for me, there's Kamala. Kamala and Dianne Feinstein. Wow, I am lucky. Dianne, of course, is rated worst of the worst, it looks like. Top spender versus it goes from very low to very high and then to top spender. She's a top spender versus her party and versus the state. And Kamala is average. I don't know. I haven't really dug in real further, but you can compare them. I can pull up Rand Paul here. Let's see how Rand is. He's considered a top saver. I'm not sure if you can actually, on the senators, maybe I can click through and see. Okay, so this is, again, the enacted bills versus all. Let's see how Rand does on bills that were actually signed into law over his entire time, or at least over the last 10 years. It's showing that he's a top saver overall, a top saver versus the Republican Party, and a top saver versus everyone else in his state. But let's look at everything and see how he does. Again. Okay, so okay, that makes more sense. Top saver, top saver, top saver on everything that he's voted for. That's good to hear. I don't know all the details of Rand Paul's voting records. I know some people who are libertarian or constitutionalists love him or hate him or love to hate him or hate to love him. So I'm not really sure. I'm not on team any politician, to be honest with you. All I care about is the Constitution. So it looks like he's much better than the people I have here, better than Kamala and Diane. Anyways, I hope you find this interesting. Please leave some comments. I'd love to hear how your representative, your imperial representative and imperial senator are doing in your area. On Facebook, clearly you can leave screenshots. So pop in a screenshot on Facebook. If you're on Twitter, maybe you can leave a screenshot as a tweet. I'm not sure. It depends on your app that you're using. I don't think you can do that on YouTube, but if you can, I'd love to hear. Maybe you can share some links, whatever. It'll be interesting to see how everyone else is doing. I hope you found this interesting, educational, fun to watch, all that good stuff. A reminder, I will not be doing a show at all for Friday morning, and I'll be back on Monday, April the 8th for the regular normal schedule, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, live. And I will see you then. Of course, if you like the show, thumbs up, smash the like, continue leaving some comments, and feel free to email me over at team@10thamendmentcenter.com. And I hope you have a great few days, and I'll see you next week here at Good Morning Liberty. Thanks so much for watching and listening. Take care.